Introduction: The Search for a Name. It wasn't a name spoken at a birthday party or stitched onto a Christmas stocking. It was a name branded onto my soul in the searing, silent language of abandonment. It was whispered in the slam of a car door as I was dropped off at another stranger's house in yet another dusty South Texas town. It was shouted in the drunken rages of my own parents, whom I barely knew and whose addictions were more desirable companions than their own son was. It was etched into my heart in the cold linoleum hallways of foster homes, where I learned that the surest way to survive was to become invisible, to expect nothing, and to trust no one. My childhood was a chaotic collage of broken places and broken people. The names I had been called were weapons, stupid, worthless, trouble. I learned the geography of South Texas not by family road trips, but by the county lines which separated one foster placement from the next. My identity was forged in a furnace of neglect and abuse. I learned to fight because weakness meant getting hurt worse than if I fought back. I learned to build walls because vulnerability was a liability I couldn't afford. I learned to see the world as a hostile place where you had to seize what you could because nothing would ever be freely given. By every worldly metric, my story should have ended there. Another statistic swallowed by the system, another life defined and defeated by the giants of their past. And for a time, it seemed it would. I carried those names, those lies, like a suit of armor I couldn't take off. They were heavy, yes, but they were also familiar. They were my story. But looking back now from a vantage point I could never have imagined, I can see a hidden thread woven through the chaos. I can see a sovereign hand guiding, protecting, and preserving me, even when I was completely oblivious to its presence. It was the hand of God. It was by His grace alone that I beat the odds. I clawed my way through school. I learned to work hard. I found a strength I didn't know I had and began to build a life for myself, a life designed to prove every one of those names wrong. My strategy was simple: I would perform, I would achieve, I would become so successful, so strong, and so self sufficient that no one could ever hurt me or label me again. I chose a profession that seemed to be the ultimate expression of this new identity. I became a police officer. For 13 years, I wore a badge and a gun. I walked into the darkest corners of human experience, confronting violence, chaos, and despair. I rose through the ranks, eventually becoming a lieutenant. On the outside, I was the embodiment of control, strength, and order. I was helping people, imposing justice on a broken world, and proving to myself and everyone else that the unwanted kid from the foster system had finally made it. I had written a new story for myself, one of strength, accomplishment, and honor, but the armor was still there just beneath the uniform. The old names, though quieter now, still echoed in the chambers of my heart. My success was real, but it was hollow. It was a painkiller, not a cure. I had managed to change my circumstances, but I had not yet changed my identity. Deep down, I was still that lost kid, fighting for a sense of worth, still trying to prove I deserved to exist. And I carried a deep seated anger toward God. I didn't know Him, but I resented Him. I felt He owed me. He had allowed my childhood to be a living hell, so the least He could do was bless my efforts now and give me the good life I was working so hard to build. My faith, if you could call it that, was a transaction. I would do my part, be a good person, work hard, and God owed me a life free from the pain of my past. Then God, in His relentless grace, introduced me to the woman who would become my wife. And through her gentle influence, for the first time in my life, I began to walk through the doors of a church, not as a visitor, but as a reluctant participant. And it was there, sitting in a pew week after week, that a new journey began, a journey more frightening and more rewarding than any police call I had ever answered. It was the journey to discover my true identity. This book is the story of that journey. It is the story of how God took a man who was defined by the lies of his past and taught him who he truly was. It is the story of how the Bible, a book I had never opened with any serious intent to read or understand, became a mirror that shattered my self made identity and revealed a glorious, God given identity I never knew was possible. It is the story of moving from a life of angry entitlement to one of humble gratitude, from a life of anxious performance to one of restful security. My story is unique in its details, but I have come to believe that the struggle it represents is universal. You may not have grown up in foster care, but you know what it is to be labeled by your past failures. You may not have been a police officer, but you know what it is to strive for success, hoping it will fill the emptiness inside. You may have grown up in the church your whole life, but you still may be living as a spiritual orphan, trying to earn the favor of a father whose love is already yours unconditionally. We are all on a quest for identity. We are all asking the same fundamental question: who am I? For years, I tried to answer that question by looking at my accomplishments, my rank, my reputation. I tried to answer it by looking inward at my own strength and resolve. It wasn't until I stopped looking around and inside me and started looking up that I found the answer. It wasn't until I stopped trying to write my own story and surrendered the pen to the divine author that my life began to make sense. My journey from a cop to a student of theology, now holding a master's in biblical studies and pursuing a PhD, was a journey of discovering that the greatest help I could ever offer people was not putting handcuffs on their wrists, but helping them break the spiritual chains that bound their hearts. I realized God didn't want me to just escape my past. He wanted me to use it. He wanted to take the giant truths of my orphanhood, my abuse, and my anger and transform them into the very weapons of faith I would use to help others find their freedom. This book is my offering to you, born from that journey. It is a roadmap to help you navigate your very own path. We will begin by exposing the competing voices of the world and the limitations of self help, showing why the answers we seek cannot be found in those. Then we will lay the immovable foundation of our true identity, our creation in God's image, and our adoption as his beloved children. We will learn how to rest in the security of Christ's finished work, freeing ourselves from the exhausting trap of performance. We will confront the lies and false labels that have shaped our lives and learn the practical daily work of renewing our minds with the truth of God's word. We will discover the purpose and calling that flows from a secure identity and see how that identity is meant to be lived out in the beautiful and yet sometimes messy context of the church. We will learn how to endure the trials that will inevitably come, not as victims, but as warriors whose faith is being refined. And we will learn to see our entire life with all its joys and sorrows as a story that is being written for God's glory. This is not a book of easy answers or quick fixes. It is an invitation to a lifelong journey of transformation. It is an invitation to search the scriptures not as a textbook, but as a love letter from your Father, a letter that tells you your true name. My prayer is that as you turn these pages, you will hear his voice cutting through all the other voices competing for your attention. My prayer is that you will see yourself as he sees you, not as an orphan, but as a child of the king, not as a failure, but as forgiven and righteous in his son, not as a victim of your past, but as a warrior whose testimony will be used for his glory. Your search for identity ends right where it all had begun the moment of your conception, in the heart of the God who made you, who loves you, and who calls you his own. It is time to come home.